Hi, welcome to Unity Spiritual Center of Lansing. I'm Reverend Sharon here with you on this first Sunday in July, this holiday weekend where we celebrate the 4th, our Independence Day. And of course, we are brought to you virtually courtesy of the coronavirus so that we can all stay safe even as we join together spiritually. Unity is a positive force for good in the neighborhood, and we understand our neighborhood is really about the whole world. Unity also has what I think is a wonderful tradition of January of each year. Our congregation votes on their favorite local charitable organization that blesses them with the work that they do in our community. And then we vote on our favorites of all those that have been nominated. And for the second quarter of this year, we have been sharing our ties with Haven House, an organization that supports families who need housing. It's particularly important during this time of COVID. So we have a message today from Molly Cook of Haven House I'd like to share with you, just so you can hear a little bit more of what our tithe funds are doing to help others in our community.
Hi, I'm Molly Cook and I am the Development Director of Haven House here in East Lansing. We are a shelter for homeless families in the area, and I just wanted to take a few moments to talk to you about the impact of your generosity on families in the area. So our goal is to keep families together when they're facing a crisis like homelessness. And what happens often is when a family becomes homeless, there might be space and shelter for mom, space in another shelter for dad, but not necessarily a place for them all to stay together. So we keep families together during those times. As you can see, our family rooms are right above me up here, and we especially help with families who might otherwise find a really hard time finding shelter. So those would be single dads with kids. We see adult parents who are caregivers to their adult children with disabilities. Often those populations have a hard time finding shelter together elsewhere. We're now all out in our play area. We have this beautiful play area that's maintained by volunteers, and here at Haven House we're not just a shelter, we're also a program. So when a family comes, they can expect to stay about 20 to 30 days before moving into a home of their own. Families each and every day meet with a housing case manager. We call them shelter coordinators, to talk about their budget, talk about rental units they're viewing, talk about finding employment, and get into a home of their own as quickly as possible. We also have volunteers who cook dinner each night and just make this a really welcoming place for people to get back on their feet. So I wanted to tell you the story of a family who recently found housing as a result of the generosity of folks like yourself. So during this time of COVID, father and his son became homeless. Dad would sleep in his car, and he would find a spot for his son to sleep each night with friends. They came to Haven House and they were able to receive case management, get some support in finding housing, and they ended up moving into an apartment of their own after just about 2 weeks. And dad is back at work, they're stable in their apartment, and dad calls often just to check in and say hi and say how nice it is for him not to have to worry about where his son will sleep each night, and for them to be together and to have a roof over their head. Hearing stories like that just really brightens things, because you get to see the full circle. And we know that full circle of someone's life is because of your generosity. And so I would love to talk to you more anytime, talk to you more about ways that you can get involved. We also have a follow-up program for families. So after families like the family I just told you about leave shelter, we follow up with them for about 6 months to a year and provide case management and supplies that they wouldn't typically receive with food stamps, like diapers. So I'd love to talk to you more. Feel free to reach out anytime. You can also find out information on our website at havenhouseel.org, and we'll have a video tour coming out in the coming weeks so you can see inside our shelter. So keep up to date on our website, and thank you so much. I am really grateful for all of you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Molly. That was wonderful to hear about the things that they do. We have, last few weeks, have been talking about some ideas brought up in the book, The 5 Invitations, Discovering What Death Can Teach Us About Living Fully. And death really is a prevalent topic these days between the COVID virus and George Floyd's death. And it's something we don't talk about much. We tend to shy away from it. And we also tend to not really think about that death can really teach us about living. So the first week we talked about that death gives us this invitation not to wait to do things, do it now. And when we do that, really our life is so much more fulfilled. And when we come to the end of our life, we won't have regrets because we've lived it. The second invitation was to welcome everything, to push nothing away. And this is just a reminder that even though we have our druthers and some experiences we'd rather not have, in every experience, this is what life is about. Life is not just about the joy. Life is also about the grief. Life is not just about happiness, it's about sadness. And it's these relative experiences that really, again, give us that fullness of life. And then last week, we talked about bringing our whole self to our life experience. Often, we may have a tendency to hide or keep internal those parts of ourselves that we don't think are so stellar, that those parts that still need some shining up, some perfection. And so we try to pretend that's not part of ourselves. And when we do that, we lose the essence of our fullness of self. So it's real important that we bring our whole self into the experience. And today we are going to talk about finding rest in the middle of things. I kind of liken this to having a haven house for our soul. When things are so busy that there's that place of rest, that place where we feel secure and safe in the middle of everything. There's a story about a monk that was busy doing his chores around the monastery. He was sweeping. And another monk walked by, and he was kind of haughty as he looked at this monk who was working and said, "Too busy." And the monk just smiled and said, "You should know there is one who is not too busy." Because this monk had discovered that the work he did, whatever he was doing, he could still be centered. He could still be in a place of peace. He could still be in that haven house in his own soul. It was not about the outer. You could find that rest by being still in the inner. So as we talk today about finding rest in all this busyness, I don't know about you, but I think I've always had a list of things that I'm going to do someday. I'm going to write that book. I'm going to create a miniature dollhouse of different types of homes that I think are delightful. And during this time of quarantine, during this time of things being shut down, a lot of us may have said, now's the time that we can meditate every day, exercise every day, do all those things we didn't seem to have time for. But yeah, here we are, 4 months into it, and I would lay you odds, if you're anything like me, there's still a lot of things on that list that aren't happening. Maybe I don't meditate every day. Maybe I don't exercise every day. I have not sat down to start writing that book yet, or to start doing some of the creative things I had in the back of my mind. So, no matter what the outer circumstances are, this whole thing about finding a place of rest really is about learning to be in that inner centeredness, that inner calm. Just like if you've ever dived below the ocean, it can be all kinds of waves and chaos up above, but when you're down below the chaos, there's a sense of stillness. The ocean is still the same above, but where you are, there is that deep sense of stillness. It's kind of like really asking us a question, do we need to die before we can rest in peace? And, last week I did a little thing with potato heads here. We had Mrs. Potato Head, and we had Pirate Potato Head. And I was thinking about these, that really all these outer things are the trappings. And the hat, whether it's a pirate hat or a lady's fancy hat, the arms, the decorations, all that. But beyond all of those trappings, there is always the potato. There is always the essence. And so it is with us. No matter what is going on out there, we always still have the essence, the truth of our being, that we are creations of the divine, that we're made of the same stuff as stars, that we have a co-creative power within us. But what happens is we sometimes get attached to the trappings. We get attached to the patched eye, or the pirate sword, or the fancy hat, whatever that might be. And we start getting very busy with our life that have to do with the trappings, with the outer things, and tell ourselves, I got plenty of time to sleep when I'm dead, when it's all over. That we just get caught up in this kind of massive moving wheel. Some of us actually fear rest, that we think something terrible is going to happen. And let's face it, we get a lot of strokes for being busy. When we're busy, we feel like we're needed, like we're important, maybe that we're more loved. Yeah, we get a lot of pats on the backs for being busy. Do you know, doctors and nurses say that in their training, exhaustion is part of their training, that they are trained to work until they're exhausted. And somehow, I think a lot of us have been trained that way, that we just keep going and going and going. It's kind of proof that we're alive. There was a while back that I made a pledge to myself that when somebody asked me to do something, I would never respond with, I don't have enough time. Because we all get the same amount of time every day. We get the same 24 hours. I really want to say, okay, I'm choosing to spend my time this way. I'm choosing to invest my time doing this right now, as opposed to really affirming some kind of shortage, some kind of scarcity of time. Do you remember when you were a kid, how long a day was? I remember how long an hour was, or a half an hour. If I had to wait even 10 minutes, it was like time just stretched on forever and ever. And as the years go by, that same thing that seems so long, all of a sudden seems like, boom, it's gone in a flash. The day is gone, the month is gone. And here we are, halfway through 2020, halfway in a day, actually, through 2020. Our mind gets so caught in the busyness that it's kind of we become a prisoner of our own thoughts of things that we need to do. And I think part of the reason for our busyness, it allows us to ignore our feelings. It's kind of an armor that goes around our heart. And yeah, it protects us from things that are uncomfortable, things that we not want to feel the pain of. But when that armor is around our heart, what happens, it also keeps us from feeling the tenderness of life, from feeling those delicate innuendos of the beauty of life. And that includes the grief, that includes the pain. We have a choice in every moment to be alert just to this moment, not to the stories we tell ourselves about shortages, not becoming prisoners of our thoughts, not becoming caught up in the shoulds and the woulds and the coulda. You know, Gandhi said, I do not want to see the future. I am concerned taking care of the present moment. God has given me no control over the moment following. Only have the ability to respond to this very moment. That's why it's so important that even though we do these outer things and we enjoy them and we have fun, that we find that place of rest at the center of our being, that core place of peace, that core place of harmony, that we can really feel that we're centered in this moment to do those things that are ours to do. One story that has always stuck with me from the New Testament was a story of Lazarus. Lazarus got very sick, and these two sisters, Mary and Martha, sent word to Jesus that his friend who he loved, friend who he was so close with, and the only one that he ever said, you know, that he loved so much, that he got very sick and he was dying. So the sisters sent word to Jesus because Jesus had done all these miracles. And Jesus received word about his friend's illness, but he stayed where he was and finished what he was doing. And 2 days later, he then journeyed to visit Mary and Martha and Lazarus in Bethany. And when he arrived there, Lazarus had died, and the story continues about healing Lazarus from his death. And there's a wonderful metaphysical meaning to that. But the key that I want to talk about today in this story is this idea of doing what needs to be done right in that present moment, that what we love still stays on and will still stay alive for us in its own time. It's not a competition of time. There's that finding that peace to be able to balance that now, each moment of the day, where we are and what we are doing, really to be present. The idea of the Sabbath really is a day of rest. And another way you could think about it, that your Sabbath could be any time, it could be a moment, but it's a moment when you worship possibilities. It's a moment when you really say, right in this moment, this is what is possible. this is what I can do. Jesus was teaching and doing some things where he was, and that's what he did in that moment. When another moment came, he made other choices. Part of the reason sometimes I think we stay so busy because we don't want our minds to wander to those places that we don't like. Kind of sometimes in the hallways you might find fear, you might find anger, worry, anxiousness. But if we keep ourselves busy, it's like we're too busy to really wander around and deal with those things that really are back here, white noise in our mind. If we look around us, nature has a wonderful rhythm of time. Nature never rushes. It just amazes me. It always takes approximately 24 hours for the earth to turn. It always takes seasons for the buds to come out on the leaves, the fruits to come out of the leaves, the fruits to fall off, the leaves to turn colors and fall off, and then that time of dormancy. There is no rushing. There is just simply being in each moment. And really being beautiful in each moment. They're different, but there's this beautiful presence just being in the moment. Church time is often said to be slow time, that church has never been known to get things done very quickly. It's more in the rhythm of nature. It just, there's a natural outpicturing of how things happen and how things get done. But I think there's a human story that to be idle is like an indulgence, that we need to be busy because we need to use our life in certain ways. We shouldn't indulge with what appears to some of us as laziness, or that we're just wasting our life by not doing something. And to be able to learn to rewrite our story, that to be idle is not to be indulgent, but it's really something that is indispensable for us. We need time to recharge. We need time to refill our cup. We need time to think about those things that are bothering us in our mind. We need time to get out of the fast lane. And boy, don't we live life in the fast lane probably way too many times. And it's far outside of nature's rhythm. It's far outside of the natural flow of things. And there are a lot of conditions that we respond to. We get into this reactivity mode. But we cannot control the conditions. But we can always determine, make a choice about how we allow these conditions to impact our life. Is this going to be the squeaky wheel that takes our attention from what our heart has told us is important in this moment? Is this thing that's happening going to be the bright, shiny thing that takes our attention away from this that we had chosen to do in this moment? And all of a sudden, it's like multitasking. And we know multitasking is a myth. We cannot focus on two different things at the same time. What happens is we switch back and forth between the two and never give our full attention to either of them, which makes it kind of haphazard and half-hearted, anything that we are doing. In Buddhism, there is a symbol called the samsara, or the wheel of life. You may have seen pictures of it. You may not have known what it was. I'm just bring up the slideshow so I can show you what the samsara was. So this wheel of life, and they talk about in the wheel of life, which is really kind of this movement that we get caught up in, the franticness of it. There are what they call the three poisons. And the first one is sometimes called our craving or our demand. It's this desire that there's something moving us forward for something better. It tells our mind, our story in our mind is that whatever we have now, whatever we're doing now isn't good enough, that we have to get better, that we have to get something greater, that we have a deficiency in ourselves. And this can be a real driver for us to try to speed up everything that we're doing. The second one is the defense or the aversion. It's really, in our life, it's a cycle of conflict. It's this relative world that it's them and us. It's this idea that somehow in our mind, we think that there is separateness, that there is otherness in our world. So we need to defend against the other, whatever that other might be. It might be people, it might be conditions, it might be jobs, whatever. We have this defensive mode. We set up this wall. And then finally, there's a distraction. The distraction is really about our ignorance, that the wisdom that we are ignoring, that we're misperceiving life, that we really forget that all of life is interdependent and all of life is impermanent, that this too will pass. This too will pass. And that everything we do has an impact on other aspects of life. So we're so intertwined and yet so impermanent at the same time. So these kind of three poisons of life, this is what makes us so hectic. This is what makes us resist to be at rest. The demands, the defense, and the distraction. For those of you that are Myers-Briggs fans, I'll give you another example of how you might look at this. Say that you went to a party, that these three poisons went to a party. Demand would go to the party and would say, go immediately to the buffet. The defense would go to the party and start complaining immediately about the food, the music, and the people that were there. And the distraction would go to the party and go, I must be at the wrong party. And I think as you think about this, you may see things where this reflects in your own life. Times when you miss what's happening because you really crave something, that you think you should have something better, that you are in deficit on something, or that you get defensive because you're in that state of otherness, or you get distracted thinking that we are separate as opposed to our oneness, and that somehow we can make something permanent last forever when life, the very nature of life, is impermanent. So the antidote to all this kind of relative craziness that we get into as humans is really an idea of mindfulness. That we learn to understand that what appears to be obstacles on our path, diversions on our path, cravings of relativity, that the obstacle themselves become the path, because these obstacles are what help us learn. We grow those inner muscles, those inner strengths to help us get by whatever obstacles are in front of us. The idea of this poison of demand, instead of ignoring it, if we start looking at why we think we have a deficit and understanding it more deeply, what happens is that can evolve into a great sense of generosity, really understanding that there are no limits, that God is our source, that we are in the flow, and the great joy that it comes from sharing what we have now in this moment, now, as opposed to striving for what we might have or think we should have in the future. And when we look at this obstacle of our defensiveness, really look at it deeply and unabashedly, bring out our fears, our anxieties, our worries all around us, then we can work through it and become really a vessel of loving kindness. We can find ourselves filled with gratitude and really express a sense of compassion to all around us, as well as maybe a sense of compassion to ourselves. And then the idea of distraction, this idea that we're trying to make the impermanent permanent, that we forget we're interdependent. As we work through it, we really become aware and become conscious of the consequences of our actions. We become more thoughtful, we become more mindful. And if we know doing this will cause that and we don't like that outcome, we can make a different choice in this moment. It's about really breathing through this, about understanding that the stress that we have about all these speeder-upper things in this samsara wheel of life is really about a story around our preferences. We would druther that we could get together with all our friends right now and not be worried about COVID. We would druther there wasn't a systematic sense of racism within our country, that we could treat all people equally and celebrate their differences, being inclusive in our wonderful diversity, seeing this as an expression of God. We would rather it wasn't so hot out today. And it's our preferences that's causing the stress, not the reality of what is happening. The reality of what is happening is really a call to our souls to grow through these experiences, to learn, to strengthen, to connect. In many ways, it's kind of like getting on a wild horse and kind of trying to tame it for a rider. That it can feel kind of dangerous, it can feel kind of bumpy, but eventually as we move through it, we get into this beautiful ride where we can really enjoy life as we tame the riots of our minds. There's a kind of a paradox of our spiritual life, and that's this idea of being a seeker. The very act of seeking says that we are separate from God, that somehow there is a great deficit in our life. And when we feel that we are a seeker that is yet to find God, yet to find the holiness and the wholeness within us, that too can cause us to be agitated. That too can cause us to be restless, to be disconnected because we're just feeling so incomplete. Eventually, the idea of seeking in the spiritual sense really becomes a wholesome desire, really becomes a sense of living, not as a seeker looking outside of ourselves, but that wholesome desire that allows us to express the love that we are, to express that highest vibration of life, to allow life to unfold, to allow our bodies to be at rest in this moment, to allow our mind to be at rest in this moment, to allow our heart to be at rest in this moment, to allow our consciousness to be at rest in this moment. You know, at any time we have the choice to close down, to put that armor around our heart, or to be open and to be at rest with everything that is happening, to be at the very calm part of that stormy sea of emotions, that stormy sea of circumstances, whatever it is that happens to be going on. So what really does death teach us? One of the things I think is quite self-evident, death teaches us to learn to deal with endings, that all things, including us, come to an end. And one of the ways we can learn about that is not by necessarily dying in this moment, but just look at how we handle endings in our life. Time and time again throughout the day, we inhale, we exhale. If the exhale has an end, how do we handle the end of our exhale? How do we handle the end of a day? We've lived this day. Are we just exhausted and ignore it? Or we take a little time to savor it? There's all different kinds of ways, not right or not wrong, just becoming aware of how we handle endings in our life. How about the end of a meal? Or even, how are you going to handle the end of this sentence? Okay. Oh, here's another way to look at it. If we go to a meeting, we're doing lots of Zoom meetings, so it's kind of fun to think about this. When it comes to time to end the meeting, have you already checked out before the meeting's over? Or do you kind of linger on the screen and wait till everybody else is gone before you go? Do you say goodbye or do you let other people say goodbye? These are all great indicators of how we deal with things coming to an end. This week, one of my classmates from ministerial school died by suicide. And we as a class are all looking at ways that we say farewell. And what we are becoming aware of is that 21 years ago, we were this very close-knit family. But life goes on, and we keep thinking about calling each other. We think about, you know, even dropping an email or something. But in Carl's passing, we have made tremendous effort to reach out, to tell people, you know, you're so important in my life. Even though we haven't been together for over 20 years, those things that you said still stay with me. I think about you. You know, you're incorporated into things that I say and think and do. I'm just so grateful that you really still are a part of my life, even though we aren't physically close together. Of course, when we come to endings, do we always think of them as sad? When you think about it, how we handle an ending really shapes how we're going to experience the next thing that's arising in our life. If things didn't end, we would never have the new experience. There's a time for things to be over and a time for other things to start. And learning to be grateful for what we have so that we can be grateful for the new thing that is coming for us just brings us a richness that we wouldn't experience otherwise. And I'll give you a really kind of simple little technique to figure out how you're dealing with endings and beginnings. Every time you open and close a door, think of it. You're just ending being in one place, and then you open the door to go to another. Close the door to one, open it to another. And we do that without emotional regret. We do that knowing that this is simply the transition from one to another. That the end is simply truly the beginning of something else. Now, along this whole line of our spiritual seeking, have you ever got caught in the idea that there is this wonderful humanness of ourselves, and there is a spiritual part of ourselves, and we need to make this jump from the humanness to our spiritualness? That's one of those erroneous stories we pick up, and if that were to be the truth, what would happen between the human and the spiritual is this gap. What is in the gap? Well, if we have created the story that we have to move from human to spiritual, that gap says, well, God's almost present, GAP, almost present. But in truth, as we go through our spiritual evolution, we find out that God is always present. There is no gap. That our humanness is the same as our spiritualness. That this truly is the spiritual idea of having a human experience. That there is nothing to be ashamed of. There's only things to go through. There is nothing to rush through. There are only things to be savored. And that to be savored is this moment, wherever this moment is. So, it reminds, just like to end this with one of my favorite Rumi poems, and you may have heard it before. And it says, out beyond our idea of right and wrong, there's a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in the grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make sense. I'll meet you there. So, as we go into the week, what's your spiritual practice for this week? Well, as we move through this samsara wheel of life, I would encourage you to find a place of rest in the middle of things, knowing that you don't have to stop what you're doing to be spiritual. It's all about the inner centeredness. It's been said that after the ecstasy, the laundry. That as we're having that spiritual aha moment where we really sense our oneness with God, we also do the laundry that doesn't stop the aha moment with God, that there is no gap, that we can find that rest. God is always present in the midst of all that we do, all that we be. Yes. I do hope you'll find some time to join me for some meditation as we explore the mind gap, really knowing that being here and now is the only place where we can rest in that deepest spiritual expression. I do want to take a moment to thank everyone for supporting this ministry, to allow us to continue to offer so many things that we do, even though we're not able to meet safely on Sundays. So thank you so much. And as we're into the last half of the year, I mentioned before that our Congregate's Choice, we vote on charities that we'd like to support locally. And when we voted this year, 3 of the charities tied: Punks with Lunch, RISE, which is a recovery group, and the Sunrise Movement, which is an ecological group. So for the next 6 months, we are going to be splitting our ties between these 3 wonderful organizations. So know that even as your donations support this ministry, they also support some great organizations within our community. But right now, let us take a time of prayer for our prosperity, that deepest gratitude. There are no demands, no cravings, no defenselessness, only within us. That we feel the oneness, we feel the interconnectedness in this impermeate life. And most of all, we feel that deep sense of compassion and gratitude for the support we are given through love, through supply, through connectedness. We bless our gifts together. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give and all that I receive. I praise, I give thanks, and I am glad. And so it is. Amen. So Unity is on demand. You can watch. You haven't watched the opening yet. We are on Facebook. We are on YouTube, and of course on our website. And if you're watching us on Sunday, we do have a Zoom fellowship that you can join us in. We're going to end our this part of the message with our favorite closing song for our services, "I Choose Love."
Peace in my life is growing because I choose love. Love's always present, it's what I'm made of. I choose love. We are a part of each other. We are one tie that binds us, that can't be undone. I choose love. I choose love. Peace in my family is growing because I choose love. Let love be present, it's what we're made of. I choose love. We are a part of each other. We are one loving family, sharing one son. I choose love. Yes, I do. I choose love. Peace for our planet is growing.